The restaurant was packed with people. The warm glow of chandeliers lit up the elegant space, and the air smelled of freshly baked bread and sizzling steak. The sound of clinking glasses and quiet laughter filled the room. Claire moved quickly between tables, balancing a tray of dishes. She was tired but determined to do her best. The night had been busy, and the staff was short-handed, but she didn't complain. She needed this job. Every dollar she earned helped pay for her college classes and took care of her little boy at home. She set down plates at a nearby table, giving the customers a polite smile before rushing to the next. But then, snap, snap. The sharp sound cut through the air. Claire froze for a second. Someone had snapped their fingers at her. She turned and saw him, a man in an expensive suit, sitting at a table near the center of the restaurant. He had slicked back hair, a silver watch that gleamed under the lights, and a frown that made it clear he was not happy. Finally, he said, shaking his head, "I've been waiting for ages. Is this what you call service?" Claire swallowed hard and walked toward him. "I'm very sorry, sir. We're a little short-staffed tonight, but I'll do my best to assist you." The man sighed loudly, as if her apology wasn't enough. "I don't want excuses. I want good service. I come to fine restaurants because I expect a certain standard." People at nearby tables looked up from their meals. Some exchanged glances. Claire felt heat rising in her face, but she kept her voice calm. "Of course, sir. How can I help you?" He leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You can start by learning how to do your job properly. Maybe if you weren't so slow, you'd be worth the tip." Claire's heart pounded. She had dealt with rude customers before, but something about this man felt different. He wasn't just upset about the wait. He was enjoying making her feel small. She took a breath. "I'll make sure you get everything you need, sir." The man scoffed. "Doubt it, but fine. I'll have the steak. Medium rare. And don't mess it up." Claire nodded, writing it down. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Wait, you forgot something." She turned back, confused. "Sir." He chuckled and gestured at his empty water glass. "Do I have to tell you everything? Fill my glass. That is your job, isn't it?" More people were watching now. The restaurant had not gone completely silent, but the tension in the air was thick. Claire picked up the pitcher from a nearby table and poured water into his glass, keeping her hand steady. As she finished, the man smirked again. "See, not so hard, is it?" Claire didn't answer. She simply nodded and walked away, her hands gripping the tray tightly. From across the room, James Caldwell, the owner of the restaurant, put down his coffee cup. He had been watching the entire thing, and he wasn't going to stay silent for long. Something had to be done. Claire walked toward the kitchen, her heart still pounding. She had been working in restaurants for years, but this moment felt different. The man in the suit, Gregory, wasn't just complaining about slow service. He was trying to embarrass her. She took a deep breath and focused on her job. She handed the order slip to the chef and grabbed a tray of drinks for another table. She couldn't let one rude customer ruin her night. But Gregory wasn't finished. As Claire passed by his table again, he cleared his throat loudly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying across the room. Claire stopped and turned. "Yes, sir." Gregory shook his head in fake disappointment. "I just realized something. I come to restaurants like this because I expect professionals. But instead I get—" He waved a hand at her, as if she were nothing. "This." A few people gasped. Others lowered their heads, pretending not to hear. Claire's face burned, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I'm sorry if I didn't meet your expectations, sir," she said softly. Gregory smirked. "Oh, it's not just my expectations. Look around." He gestured to the other diners. "I'm sure everyone here agrees. Slow service, clumsy hands, no attention to detail. Tell me, did they just hire you off the street?" Claire gripped her tray tighter. She could feel her hands trembling. Gregory wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His voice was sharp enough to cut through the air. Someone at a nearby table finally spoke up. It was an older woman with kind eyes. "Sir, that's uncalled for," she said. Gregory turned to her and gave a fake smile. "Oh, I'm just stating facts. If I wanted to wait forever for food, I would have stayed home." More whispers filled the room. Some people looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Others watched in silent disapproval. Claire wanted to shrink into the floor, but she wouldn't let herself cry. Not here, not in front of him. She had worked too hard to be treated like this. She forced a smile. "Your food will be out soon, sir." Gregory chuckled. "Oh, I'm sure. Just try not to drop it on the way." That was it. That was the moment Claire felt herself break inside. She turned away, trying to hold herself together. But she didn't notice the man standing near the bar. James Caldwell, the owner of the restaurant. James had been watching the entire exchange. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled into a fist at his side. He had seen rude customers before, but this was something else. This was cruelty. And he wouldn't allow it in his restaurant. He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and walked toward Gregory's table. The energy in the room shifted. People noticed James moving with quiet confidence, his expression unreadable. Claire, still near the kitchen, caught sight of him. Her breath hitched. The restaurant's owner was about to step in. And Gregory had no idea what was coming next. The restaurant grew quiet as James Caldwell, the owner, walked toward Gregory's table. His footsteps were steady, his face calm, but his eyes were sharp. He had owned this restaurant for years, and he had seen all kinds of customers. Some were kind, some were impatient. But this was unacceptable. Claire, still holding her tray, froze as she saw James approach. Her heart pounded. He wasn't just any owner. He was known for treating his staff like family. If he was stepping in, it meant something serious was about to happen. Gregory, still smirking, didn't notice James at first. He casually sipped his water, clearly pleased with himself. But when he set his glass down, he saw the tall man standing beside his table. James's voice was firm but polite. "Good evening, sir. I'm James Caldwell, the owner of this restaurant." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "Oh, the owner?" He leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed. "Finally, maybe you can explain why the service here is so terrible." James didn't react. He simply placed his hands in his pockets and spoke evenly. "Actually, I'd like to talk about your behavior toward my waitress." A few people gasped. The nearby diners turned their heads, watching closely. Gregory scoffed. "My behavior?" He chuckled. "I was just pointing out a simple fact. Your staff isn't exactly trained well." James tilted his head slightly. "Is that so?" His voice was calm, but there was something in his tone, something that made people sit up straighter. Gregory sighed dramatically. "Look, I run businesses myself. I know how things work. If your employees can't handle a little pressure, they shouldn't be in customer service." James nodded slowly, as if considering the words. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down across from Gregory. The air in the restaurant shifted. Claire held her breath. She had never seen James do this before. James leaned forward slightly, keeping his voice low and steady. "Tell me, sir, do you always speak to people this way? Or do you only do it when you think no one will stop you?" Gregory's smirk faltered for the first time. James continued. "Because from where I'm sitting, you didn't come here for a meal. You came here to make someone feel small." He gestured toward Claire without looking away. "And I don't tolerate that in my restaurant." The tension in the air thickened. Gregory laughed, but it was forced. "Oh, come on. You're overreacting. I was just having a little fun." James' expression remained unreadable. "No, you weren't. You were trying to humiliate one of my staff members in front of an entire restaurant." Gregory's face darkened. "What, are you going to throw me out for giving criticism?" James gave a small, knowing smile. "No, I'm going to give you a choice." Gregory frowned. "A choice?" James leaned back in his chair. "You can apologize to Claire right now. Or," he glanced toward the entrance, where a security guard stood watching, "you can leave, and you won't be coming back." A ripple of whispers spread through the restaurant. Gregory's smirk was completely gone now. His jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists on the table. He wasn't used to being challenged. The entire restaurant waited in complete silence for his answer. And Claire, she couldn't believe what she was witnessing. The restaurant was completely silent. Everyone's eyes were on Gregory, waiting to see what he would do. His face was tense, his fingers tapping against the table. He didn't like being put in a corner. James Caldwell, the owner, sat across from him, calm and steady. His words still hung in the air. "You can apologize to Claire right now, or you can leave." Claire stood near the kitchen, her heart racing. Was this really happening? No one had ever defended her like this before, not in such a public way. Gregory forced a laugh, though it sounded strained. "Are you serious?" He shook his head. "You expect me to apologize? For what? For pointing out bad service?" James didn't blink. "No, for treating another human being like they're beneath you." Gregory's jaw tightened. He looked around the restaurant, realizing everyone was still watching. People weren't on his side. They weren't laughing with him. They were waiting for him to do the right thing. His face turned slightly red. For the first time, he wasn't in control. Gregory let out a slow breath. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. If he left now, he would look weak. But if he apologized, his pride wouldn't let him. He pushed back his chair and stood up. "Fine," he said sharply. "I'll leave." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a few large bills, and tossed them onto the table. That should cover the meal. Not that it was worth it. James didn't move. He just watched as Gregory grabbed his coat and turned toward the door. But before he could leave, Claire found her voice. "Wait." Gregory stopped. He turned slowly, eyes narrowed. Claire took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her hands were still trembling, but her voice was steady. "You know, I wasn't upset because you complained. Customers complain all the time." She looked him right in the eyes. "I was upset because you wanted to hurt me, and I don't think you even know why." Gregory stiffened. More whispers spread through the restaurant. James watched, saying nothing. Claire's words weren't spoken in anger. They were spoken in truth. Gregory's lips parted slightly, but he said nothing. For the first time that evening, he had no comeback. Claire gave him a small, sad smile. "I hope, one day, you don't feel like you have to put people down to feel important." Gregory's hands clenched into fists. His face went through several emotions: anger, embarrassment, even confusion. But in the end, he just scoffed, turned, and walked out the door without another word. The restaurant remained silent for a few seconds. Then, suddenly, clap, a single applause. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was clapping. Claire's eyes widened. She wasn't expecting that. James stood up, his eyes warm with pride. He looked at Claire and gave her a small nod before turning to the rest of the diners. "Thank you, everyone. Now let's get back to enjoying our meals." Slowly, the restaurant returned to normal. The tension faded. Conversations restarted. But Claire, she stood there, feeling something new. Strength. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just someone who served food and took orders. She had stood up to someone who tried to tear her down. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly seen. As the applause died down, Claire took a deep breath. Her hands were still shaking, but she felt different. Lighter, stronger. She looked at James, the owner, who gave her a small nod. "You handled that well," he said, his voice calm but approving. Claire wasn't sure what to say. Had she really just spoken up like that? The old Claire, the one from this morning, would have just swallowed her feelings and moved on. But something inside her had changed. She felt proud. She turned back to the other customers, expecting them to go back to their meals. But instead, several people were still looking at her with kind smiles. An older woman at a nearby table spoke up. "That was brave, dear. You didn't deserve that treatment." A man sitting with his family nodded. "Some people think money gives them the right to be rude. You showed him otherwise." Claire's face warmed. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. Just then, another customer, a young woman with glasses, stood up and walked toward her. "Hey," she said softly. I saw what happened, and I just wanted to say that you inspired me." Claire blinked. "Inspired you?" The woman smiled shyly. "I work in customer service too. I've dealt with people like him before, and I always feel so small when it happens. But seeing you stand up for yourself, it made me realize that I don't have to just take it." Claire's heart swelled. She had never thought of herself as an inspiration. She was just doing her job. The woman hesitated, then added, "I hope you never stop standing up for yourself." Claire nodded slowly, a small smile forming on her lips. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. The woman returned to her seat, and Claire suddenly realized that, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't doubting herself. She wasn't wondering if she had done the right thing. She wasn't replaying the situation in her head, worrying about what she could have said differently. She had spoken her truth, and that was enough. Back to work, but not the same. A few minutes later, the restaurant returned to normal. People were chatting again, waiters moved between tables, and the kitchen staff was busy preparing meals. Claire took a deep breath and got back to work. She walked toward a table where a kind-looking couple was waiting for their food. "I'm sorry for the wait," she said with a polite smile. "Can I get you anything while you wait for your meal?" The man shook his head. "No rush at all. You've been through enough tonight." The woman beside him added, "You handled that situation with such grace. I hope you know that." Claire felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said sincerely. As she moved through the restaurant, something strange happened. Customers kept being extra kind. A group of friends at one table left an extra-large tip with a note. For the waitress who stood her ground. A businessman near the window smiled and said, "People like you make the world better." Even the kitchen staff, who had seen everything from behind the counter, gave her thumbs-ups and encouraging smiles. Claire couldn't stop smiling. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. A conversation with the owner. At the end of her shift, Claire walked into the back room to get her things. She was exhausted, but it was a different kind of tired. A good kind. James was there, checking over some paperwork. When he saw her, he set his pen down. "You did well today," he said. Claire gave a small laugh. "I don't know if well is the right word. I think my legs were shaking the whole time." James smiled. "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you stood up for yourself. Not everyone does." Claire thought about that. He was right. She had always been the kind of person to let things go, to avoid conflict. But today had been different, and she liked the person she had been today. James leaned back in his chair. "I've been in this business a long time. I've seen customers like that before, and I'll see them again. But let me tell you something." Claire looked at him, waiting. James's expression was serious now. "People will only treat you the way you allow them to." His words sank in. Claire nodded slowly. James gave her a final nod. "Now go home and get some rest. You've earned it." As Claire grabbed her bag and walked out of the restaurant, she felt different. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who knew her worth. The next morning, Claire walked into the restaurant feeling different. She had barely slept, replaying everything from the night before. But this time, she wasn't overthinking in a bad way. She felt stronger. As she stepped inside, she noticed something strange. The other employees were staring at her. One of the cooks, Danny, gave her a grin. "Hey, look at our new celebrity." Claire frowned. "What?" James, the owner, walked out of his office with his phone in hand. "You've gone viral, Claire." Her heart skipped a beat. Viral. James handed her his phone. On the screen was a video of her from last night. Someone had recorded the moment she stood up to the rude customer. And now it was all over the internet. Claire watched in shock as the video played. She saw herself standing there, looking nervous but firm, speaking up for herself while the rude man glared at her. The video had thousands of likes, shares, and comments. "People are calling you a hero," James said with a proud smile. Claire's hands trembled as she scrolled through the comments. "This waitress is amazing. She handled it so well. No one deserves to be treated like that. Respect to her. She deserves a raise." She swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say." James chuckled. "Well, you don't have to say anything. Just keep being yourself." An unexpected visitor. A few hours into her shift, the restaurant was busier than usual. More customers than ever before were coming in, and Claire noticed that many of them were looking at her. A young couple smiled as she passed by. A group of teenagers whispered excitedly, one of them even waving at her. It was strange but also nice. Then, as she was refilling a customer's drink, the front door opened and Claire froze. The rude man from last night walked in. Her stomach tightened. What was he doing here? The restaurant grew quiet. People noticed him. Some even whispered to each other. Claire felt her heart start to race, but she forced herself to stay calm. The man walked up to the counter and cleared his throat. He looked different today. Less arrogant, less sure of himself. He looked embarrassed. "I need to speak with Claire," he said. James, standing behind the counter, crossed his arms. "She's busy." Claire took a deep breath. "It's okay." James gave her a careful look, then nodded and stepped aside. The man sighed. "Look, I came to apologize." Claire's eyes widened. She hadn't expected that. The man rubbed the back of his neck. I saw the video, and I read the comments. I didn't realize how bad I looked until I watched myself." He took a deep breath. "The truth is, I had a bad day yesterday. I lost an important deal at work. I shouldn't have taken it out on you." Claire stared at him. Was he really apologizing? "I'm not saying this to make excuses," he continued. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." For a moment, Claire didn't know what to say. Then, finally, she spoke. "Thank you." The man exhaled, looking relieved. "I also wanted to make it up to you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "I know money can't erase what happened, but this is for you." Claire hesitated. She didn't want his money. But when she opened the envelope, her eyes widened. Inside was a donation receipt for a charity that helped low-income workers. It was made in her name. She looked up at him in surprise. "I figured," the man said awkwardly, "that maybe this was a better way to say sorry." Claire felt something in her chest soften. Maybe people really could change. She nodded. "I appreciate it." The man gave her a small, embarrassed smile before turning and walking out of the restaurant. The second he left, the room burst into applause. Danny grinned. "Now that was something I didn't expect." James shook his head in amazement. "You really made an impact, Claire." Claire smiled for real this time. She wasn't just the waitress who got yelled at anymore. She was someone who had stood her ground and changed a person for the better. The restaurant buzzed with excitement after the rude customer left. Claire still couldn't believe what had just happened. He had actually apologized. As she went back to work, customers kept smiling at her, some even giving her encouraging words. "You handled that so well," an older woman told her. "I would have lost my temper, but you were so calm," another customer said. Claire felt different now. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, respected, a special gift. Later that evening, James called Claire into his office. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked in, a little nervous. James smiled and gestured for her to sit. I wanted to talk to you about something important. Claire sat down. Is everything okay? James chuckled. Better than okay. You've done something incredible, Claire. And I think it's time I do something for you. He slid a small envelope across the table. Claire hesitated before picking it up. She opened it and gasped. Inside was a check with a bonus amount that made her eyes widen. James, I can't accept this. Yes, you can, he said firmly. You've worked here for a long time. You've always been kind, patient, and hardworking. What happened with that customer only showed me what I already knew. You're special, Claire. And I want to make sure you know that too. Claire swallowed hard, feeling a lump in her throat. No one had ever done something like this for her before. James leaned back in his chair. I also want to offer you a new position. Claire's head snapped up. A new position. I need an assistant manager, James said with a grin. Someone who knows this place inside and out. Someone who cares about people. And I think you're perfect for the job. Claire's mouth fell open. Her assistant manager. I don't know what to say, she whispered. James chuckled. Say yes. Claire looked down at the check, then back up at James. This place had been her second home for years. She had started as a nervous new hire, unsure of herself. Now she was being offered a leadership role. A slow smile spread across her face. Yes. James clapped his hands together. That's what I wanted to hear. A heartfelt call. That night, Claire left the restaurant feeling lighter than she had in years. She walked down the sidewalk, clutching the envelope in her hands. When she reached her small apartment, she sat on the couch and took a deep breath. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. Hello, a warm voice answered. Mom, Claire said softly. Her mother immediately knew something was different. Claire, what's wrong? Claire let out a small laugh. Nothing's wrong, Mom. I just had the best day of my life. She told her mother everything. About the rude customer, about the video going viral, about the apology, about James offering her the assistant manager job. When she finished, her mother was silent for a moment. Then, in a voice full of pride, she said, I knew it. I knew you had something special in you. Tears welled up in Claire's eyes. For the first time, she believed it too. Her mother chuckled. You know what this means, right? What? You're just getting started. Claire smiled, feeling it deep in her heart. She had spent so much time doubting herself, believing she was just a waitress. But now she knew better. She was strong. She was capable. And this was only the beginning. The next few weeks flew by for Claire. Life at the restaurant had changed for her in ways she never expected. As the new assistant manager, she felt a sense of responsibility she had never known before. Every morning, she woke up with a new sense of purpose. She spent her days working side by side with James, learning the ins and outs of managing the restaurant. The staff quickly began to see her as a leader, someone they could count on. And as for the customers, they seemed to notice the change in her too. There was something different about Claire now. She was confident, sure of herself, and everyone could feel it. One afternoon, as Claire was helping out in the kitchen, she noticed a familiar face sitting at a table by the window. It was the man who had insulted her weeks ago, the one who had berated her in front of everyone. Her heart skipped a beat, but this time she wasn't scared. She was ready. Claire walked over to his table, keeping her head held high. The man looked up, his eyes widening when he saw her. Claire, he said, his voice unsure. I didn't expect to see you here. Claire smiled politely. I work here now. The man shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly embarrassed. I owe you an apology, he said. I know I already apologized, but I feel like I owe you more. What I did that night was awful, and I've been thinking about it ever since. Claire nodded, her expression softening. I appreciate that, but I think you've already done enough by showing respect. The man smiled, clearly relieved. I'm glad you think so. I've been telling everyone I know about how you handled the situation. I didn't realize what a big impact it would have. As Claire listened, she felt something warm spread inside her. It was like a weight had been lifted. This was a full circle moment, a moment of closure. The man wasn't just apologizing to her. He was admitting his mistake in front of others, changing how he saw her and even how he saw himself. He stood up, extending his hand. "I'd like to offer you a drink on the house," he said with a genuine smile. Claire shook his hand, surprised by how sincere he seemed. "Thank you," she said, "but I think I'll have to take a rain check on that." After a brief moment of silence, the man laughed. "Fair enough. I'll let you get back to work." As he left the restaurant, Claire stood there for a moment, her hand still feeling the warmth of his handshake. She had come so far since that night, the night she had been humiliated, the night she had felt small and insignificant. Now she felt empowered. Later that day, James pulled her aside to thank her for the way she had handled the situation with the man. "You've got a real way with people, Claire," he said. "You're not just a good assistant manager. You're a natural leader." Claire smiled, grateful for his words. "Thank you, James. It's been a journey." As she walked around the restaurant, interacting with customers and staff, Claire realized just how much she had grown. She was no longer just the waitress who had been mistreated. She was someone who had earned her place, someone who had faced adversity and turned it into an opportunity for growth. She looked around at the familiar faces, the staff, the regular customers, and even the strangers who walked in every day, and she felt a sense of pride. This place had become her family, and she had earned her spot among them. The days continued to pass, but Claire knew one thing for sure. She was ready for whatever came next. She had found her strength, and now she was unstoppable.